Hey there, friends, and welcome to episode 244 of Just the Zoo of Us. In this week's episode, we are celebrating Pride Month by bringing you a different type of review because our guests are treating us to a series of acts on gay animals. We discuss manatee wuzzles, elephant matriarchy, giraffes necking in more ways than one, eagle throuples, the impact of prejudice on science, and so much more. This episode is a celebration of love, family, and community in, as our guest puts it, the animal queendom. Since a lot of this episode is about the diversity of sexual behavior in animals, naturally, it does contain more discussion of sex than most of our episodes, including behaviors that aren't just motivated by reproduction. These discussions are not graphic or explicit, but it is a focal point of the conversation. So I do encourage any young listeners to please check in with your adults before listening. This is a topic that means a lot to me. It is really close to my heart, and I'm very excited to share it with you. Just the Zoo of Us presents a gay animal review with Owen and Laine Kaplan-Levenson. Hello, everybody. This is Ellen Weatherford with Just the Zoo of Us, your favorite animal review podcast, where this week that review is being spelled a little differently because we're doing a different type of review this week. I'm really excited to bring a show of sorts about some really cool animals I'm excited to talk about. This week, I have new friends. This is Owen and Laine Kaplan-Levenson. Owen and Laine, can you please say hi?
Hi.
Hi. So happy to be here.
Yes.
I am so excited to talk to y'all. Owen, what are your pronouns?
My pronouns are they, he, they. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Laine, what are your pronouns?
My pronouns are they, them.
Thank you so much. Before we talk about our amazing animals for this week, I would love to get to know y'all a little bit because you have a very attention-grabbing podcast that I am so excited about, and I think a lot of people are going to be really happy to hear about. Let's start with you, Owen. Could you let our friends listening know what got you into this work with the Field Guide to Gay Animals?
Yeah, hi, I'm Owen, and again, thank you so much. This is such a joy to get to share this time with you and share this topic, and that is the diversity of the animal kingdom, or shall I say animal queendom. Mm-hmm. Our podcast is called A Field Guide to Gay Animals, and in it we are exploring and celebrating all kinds of beautiful diversity that exists and reflects our own personal diversity, and that we're talking about gender and sex, as well as family structures, pair bonding structures. The animal queendom is such a beautiful thing, and so frequently we forget to acknowledge it, or we're not taught about it. And so our podcast is an investigation and an exploration of that. We call it a field guide because we're kind of hitting the trail together, Laine and I, going out, talking to experts, talking to animal lovers, and getting to know what we can know along the way, and seeing how those reflections teach us about ourselves. I love being in nature. I do a lot of work in clinical settings, whether it's at a public health sex clinic or in hospitals. I'm a medical clown, so I'm a therapeutic joy practitioner. I get to spend a lot of time specifically in pediatrics, but those can be really difficult, sad and draining environments. Even medical clowns get sad. And so I have found that spending time in nature has been really restorative. It has been like a beautiful contemplative practice. I am a queer birder. I love watching birds, and I love being in nature with my wonderful co-host, Laine Kaplan-Levenson. And so we thought, why don't we spend time sort of finding ourselves in nature? And that led us to making a podcast about this exuberance.
That's amazing. Laine, what has your journey been like that brought you to this podcast?
Yeah, well, I also want to just say thanks so much for having us. It's really a joy to be here. And,
Thank you.
You know, I also love being in nature, and it's funny, this comes up a little bit in the show. I just totally admit that I have this slight fear of animals as much as I love being in the wild. So my appreciation of nature and my love of animals is with this kind of relationship of being a bit terrified of them, which I think is, common. I think that I share this with a lot of people.
I'm sure the animals prefer that.
Yeah,
they would probably
right.
like for you to feel that way.
Yeah, there's such thing as like too much curiosity.
I'm not getting too close.
Like, don't go over there.
Healthy respect.
Exactly. I keep a very healthy distance with my healthy respect.
Yeah, boundaries.
And so, making this show is interesting because it's like, I don't know if, a few years ago I would have thought, oh, I'm going to be making a show about animals. But that's, I think, what's been such a beautiful part of this journey for me. And some of what Owen touched on is that this show is so much more than just a show about animals or a show about gay animals, even though, of course, that's in the title. It's this real exploration of nature, of the natural world, of all that exists in the natural world, and how we can really feel connected and a part of that, and how, anyone that listens to this can kind of understand and look at the world in new ways when thinking about it from different angles, from kind of looking at something and turning it slightly and saying, I never really thought of it that way. And why didn't I? What are the ways that I was kind of fed things and not fed things? And, all the ways that we're kind of taught science, history, and, from whom. And that's like so many ways that I get interested in something, how I got interested in this.
Right. It feels like kind of like uncovering, like, hold on. Why didn't someone tell me about this sooner?
Yes.
Like, why didn't I know about this?
Yes.
And like,
such a journey of discovery.
Yes.
And Laine and I, to put it sort of simply, we're both storytellers. We both really enjoy learning, exploring, and being oriented towards wonder and figuring out, like, how do we share that with other people? And so that's why we're not scientific researchers. This isn't a book of science. This is a podcast. We want to bring people along for that journey of wonder. And the universe, our natural world, is so much more expansive and exuberant than we have been led to believe in many ways. To touch on what Laine was saying, like, so much of what we came across was like, why wasn't this in my biology class? Like, why was I only taught like such a limited idea of like what the objective of nature is, and that it's just about reproduction and survival of the fittest, when that's like really ungenerous, because nature is doing all kinds of things.
Right. While you guys have been, doing the discovering for this podcast, has that been something that you've come across? Have you come across any things where you're like, wow, it seems like people were ignoring this on purpose? You know what I mean? Like, where it feels like, wow, nope, it feels like they didn't want to talk about this.
Yes. Oh, 100%.
Yes, 1,000 times yes. It is written into the historic record.
Yeah.
Yeah. We call it the closeting.
Yeah, for sure.
Of queer animals. Absolutely.
Yeah, because so much of like what I guess people in general, like I joked about this, but like the normies, right? Like the average everyday person, like so much of what we know has to be told to us, because I'm not going to be out in like the rainforests of Borneo or out on the African savannah doing these observations myself. I'm going to kind of rely on people to tell me what they see. And if they're choosing selectively not to tell me about certain things that they see, if they're just like, if they find it unbecoming, I suppose, then I would never know that that really does happen out there. And I might be missing out on like a really beautiful part of nature just because somebody doesn't see it fit to tell me about it.
Yes. Yeah, and some of that, the difficulty comes from animals being hard to observe often. For instance, dolphins. We talked to a marine biologist who was like, for so long, we didn't know what dolphins were doing. It's so complicated. It happens underwater. Like, we don't have the, like when you don't have the technology. And sometimes it's really far away, like penguins in the Antarctic. So sometimes it really has to do with like not being there, not being able to observe. Sometimes it's hard to observe because animals all look the same and we don't know what's going on, or they're up in a canopy or underground, or like whales deep in the ocean. And sometimes scientists are observing things, like with penguins, like with bighorn sheep, and they're choosing to not publish, to not talk about it. because they are offended by what they're seeing, they're afraid or disturbed in some way because what they're seeing challenges the dominant narratives that they have been taught, that they have learned and hold as true, which are often like heteronormative, patriarchal, reprocentric, colonial, imperialist narratives, especially when you go back to the 19th, 18th century. These men are going out and they're observing things, and then they get to be the arbiters of what we hear. And there's some really impressive and disturbing examples of that.
And, you know, other things happen, like, for instance, with the dolphin example, like Owen's saying, I mean, this really blew my mind in terms of, you know, how much we didn't know until recently. This biologist that we interviewed, when she went to go study dolphins in the wild, she went in the 1980s, and she said that she was one of the first scientists to really go study dolphins in the wild, that people hardly knew a single thing about dolphin behavior in their natural habitat in the 1980s, which I just had
seems too late.
Isn't that unbelievable? And so then it's not that people knew nothing about dolphins. People had been studying dolphins to a degree before that in captivity. And then, you know, only what people knew about dolphins was what they knew in captivity. And actually, a lot of what dolphins are doing in captivity contradicts what they might do in the wild. And then also, let's say, you know, you see homosexual behavior in captivity, then scientists and researchers project, oh, they're doing that because they're being held captive. And there's all types of things that are then being put onto these dolphins. So then it's being seen that that same behavior is being done in the wild, to say, well, they're doing it in the, you know, in the deep, wide ocean too. And
right,
so,
just for funsies.
Yes, exactly. And so it's really, really complex.
Absolutely. And this biologist, like, once she did observe this, and even after she had collected an abundance of data and evidence, she was hesitant to publish because she didn't know what sort of pushback would come from the institution, from the larger scientific community, from other people receiving this and interpreting this. They didn't know how that would reflect on her as a scientist, on her study, on her field site. So she waited 2 decades before publishing it. And that's the sort of thing, that hesitation does have repercussions. And the penguin, there's an excellent penguin example. George Murray Levick, who was a famed Antarctic explorer, working in 1910, I believe. You know, very few people are observing penguins in the wild. This is before they're like in zoos. So things change when we do start bringing animals into the spectrum of captivity and start to put eyes on them ourselves. But he observed so much like male-male pair bonding, co-parenting, female-female pair bonding, female-female co-parenting, all sorts of behaviors. But because he was worried about coming back and publishing this and then being potentially like made a pariah among the scientific community, and because of moralism, he was projecting stigma and shame on these behaviors, he wrote all of the observations in secret code.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they were not decoded for 100 years.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible.
Yeah. So we think of penguins as like, they're often a go-to animal where we're like, they're gay. We see gay penguins. There's Roy and Silo at the Central Park Zoo. There's an adorable book called Tango Makes 3 about Roy and Silo and their adorable chick, Tango. But it's really not until like we're all, like the general public is starting to watch animals and starting to see like, oh, now we can't deny that these dynamics are existing, are occurring. But to Laine's point, then we start trying to explain them away.
Right.
And we're like, okay, well, this must be an aberrant behavior as a result of environment. Whereas we do believe that other things we're studying in captivity are true to the species. This is one that like we can't say until we see an analog in the wild. We're hesitant to say. Yeah. And the book, I should say, Tango Makes 3, is also being banned. Every year, it's being taken from libraries, you know?
Oh, I'm from Florida, the capital of banning books.
Yeah, you've heard about that happening.
Yes, heard about it.
Yeah.
And so much of that, I think, like that hesitation and the fear of like, what is the scientific community going to say? What is the academic community going to say? What is the public going to say? I think like boils down to this tendency to equate like homophobia with like natural order, with this idea of like reproduction is the sole purpose of mating, of courtship, of all these like behaviors we associate, that it must be reproductively motivated. Therefore, anything deviating from that we see as like, well, that can't be natural. Like that can't be the way they would do that in the wild. And then when you see them doing it in the wild, it's like, well, now what kind of mental gymnastics can we do to explain this one away next? So much of it is just like this projection of the completely human invention of homophobia and being like, no, how can we project this onto nature?
Totally.
Yeah, to support our claims. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so one of our objectives, honestly, of this podcast is to sort of like lean in to the affirmation that like we as human animals, as mammals, are part of nature. And nature is queer because like we are. And like we can see that reflected. It doesn't need to be a one-to-one. We don't need to like justify our experience of queerness or of gender by seeing it in the wild, because we just are part of that.
Yeah.
We are. And it's there, and it's beautiful to find kinship. And it's beautiful to feel sort of like held by the wider animal queendom in that way, to be bolstered by it because we're up against so much, so frequently. But we're not trying to like, make any claims like because it's in the wild, therefore it's justifiable in humans. We believe that it is just who we are, and we're just going to celebrate it everywhere we see it.
There's nothing to justify. It's just the way people are. Like,
yeah.
I really love the phrasing of like feeling held by nature, especially from someone who I grew up in Florida, and I grew up around some really incredible, beautiful natural landscapes and wildlife, but also had a complicated relationship to the culture there, and just feeling really like some type of way about feeling like I love this place and I love the natural landscape here, but also feeling not at home. Very sort of complicated feelings around that. But from that background, I'm really excited to talk about one of the gay animals we wanted to highlight for this episode, which is just a hometown icon for me, the manatee.
The manatee.
Can't get enough of them. I have some really cherished memories alongside manatees. Do you know of any examples of gay manatees?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about gay manatees, because I've always loved them, but like I feel like I really want that like deeper look into the life and love of a manatee.
Yeah, manatees are very sexual beings. I mean, you look at them and you're like, oh, they're just like so soft and cute, but they're like really tender to each other, and they participate in a lot of sex. They actually have sex like throughout most of the year. It will like, the frequency of it will slow down in the winter, obviously, but they have a lot of sex. They're social. They're very social, and like sex is part of like creating bonds, creating social bonds. And there is an abundance of observable same-sex sexual behavior, as well as affection and courtship among manatees. And there's also like more types of sexual encounters when it's same-sex than when it is heterosexual.
Oh, really?
So like same-sex manatees will perform like a higher amount of like kissing, essentially, like rubbing their snouts to each other. They'll use their fins.
Really?
And this will sometimes begin as just like two manatees, either female, or male. And then often it will become this like joyous thing that some scientists call it a wuzzle, a group
no way
coming together.
That is the goofiest possible word they could have used.
Oh yeah, marine biologists like clearly had a whimsical bone in their body.
They're in a silly, goofy mood.
Yeah, they were. I mean, and how could you not be when you're watching these like gorgeous, charismatic, like underwater creatures spinning around? They do a lot of embracing and spinning. And yeah, and the marine biologist was like, sure, that's a wuzzle. And when it comes to same-sex sexual behavior, the amount of time that they spend together is longer than when it's heterosexual sex.
Really?
Yeah, 4 to 8 times longer.
Interesting.
Which just, you're like, this is not about reproduction.
Right.
This is about pleasure. This is about it feeling good. This is about friendship. This is about bonding. This is like when we focus only on reproduction and we see all these behaviors as serving one singular purpose to make more of the species, we're getting rid of every animal's capacity for pleasure, for joy. And those things are so important. And yes, they do have biological benefits. Hormonal responses are important. Creating bonds within a herd, within a social unit are really important. It strengthens, survival skills, and it helps to emotionally regulate. It de-escalates aggression. Yes, that's great. Those are all wonderful reasons to participate in a queer relationship, but also the sex feels good to them, and they're expressing that, and they're spending longer doing it, and they're sharing it with each other.
Maybe they're like, you know what? This is not about reproduction. We don't have there's no goalpost, right? Like, let's just kind of
take our time,
have our fun with it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's have our fun with it. Absolutely.
Have you guys seen manatees? Have you been around manatees, like in the wild?
I have gone to Florida and swum with manatees before, and it is awe-inspiring. Absolutely.
Laine, have you seen manatees?
No, we were going to maybe go for the show, and then we ended up not going this season, but it's a huge dream of mine, and I still haven't done it.
Okay, so when you see manatees, especially if you get to see them in the winter, when they do like all come inland, they come into the springs and up the rivers in Florida, you'll see them really in the fresh water. In the wintertime, there will be hundreds and hundreds of them in what you would think of as like, if you imagine like these big herds of, I'm thinking about like in Africa or something, you would see these giant herds of like water buffalo or, zebras or something. And you see that sort of like ungulate behavior of traveling in these big, massive herds. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about these herds on land, we talk about, they have social structures and complex relationships with the other members of the herd. And there's no reason manatees wouldn't also do that, being their cousins, not of the like, water buffaloes and stuff. They're cousins of the elephants.
Absolutely. Subungulates. Yeah. There's a reason they're called sea cows. I think that is so beautiful. And it's such an important reminder, like, that we also are social creatures. We're also social mammals that gain so much from being around each other. And I think that, like, we've done ourselves a disservice by believing that we're supposed to survive independently when we're actually supposed to survive interdependently. And when it comes to ungulates, to hoofed animals, to manatees and cattle and giraffes and elephants, creatures we're going to be talking about today, that's one of the most inspiring things for me. And one of the most inspiring examples that they provide, all these different ways of forming social units, of being in relation with each other. And sex plays a part of that, but also caretaking and so much more.
Hey there, we're going to take a quick break to hear from a couple of our friends on the Maximum Fun Network. When we get back, we are going to talk elephants, giraffes, eagles, horseshoe crabs, you name it. So stay with us.
Have you ever wanted to know the sad lore behind Chuck E. Cheese's love of birthday parties?
Or my Saturday mornings are reserved for cartoons?
Or have you wanted to know how beloved virtual pet site Neopets fell into the hands of Scientologists?
Or how a former Mattel employee managed to grow Sega into a video game powerhouse?
Join us, hosts Austin and Brenda, and learn all of these things and more at Secret Histories of Nerd Mysteries, now on Maximum Fun.
I'm Dan McCoy.
I'm Stuart Wellington.
I'm Elliot Kalin.
And together we are The Flophouse, a long-running podcast on the Maximum Fun Network, where we watch a bad movie and then talk about it.
And because we're so long-running, maybe you haven't given us a chance. I get it, but you don't actually have to know anything about previous episodes to enjoy us, and I promise you that if you find our voices irritating, we grow endearing over time.
Perhaps you listened to one of our old episodes and decided that we were dumb and immature. Well, we've been doing this a while now. We have become smarter and more mature, and generally nicer to Dan.
But we are only human, so no promises.
Find the Flophouse on MaximumFun.org or wherever you get podcasts.
So since we were talking about manatees, a pretty natural step over in the sort of mammal family tree is their cousins, the elephants. Elephants, I think, are often associated with this like intelligence and tenderness, but people don't ever talk about any sort of queer behavior in elephants. What's going on with elephants?
One of the things that we love about elephants is that it gets beyond just thinking about queerness in terms of sex and what type of sex animals are having. I mean, elephants have a lot of gay sex. That's not what I'm trying to say.
That's not up for debate.
We can talk about that. There's plenty to say about that. But when it comes to, family structure, when it comes to matriarchal societies, when it comes to the, similar with this ungulate, resisting insularity and this type of herd community dedication, there's so much about elephant communities and societies that are just so fascinating, that really are queer in how we're defining it and how we're looking at it in this series. And so one of the things that we learned that is just so beautiful is that when you look at an elephant herd that could be, upwards of 500 to 1,000 elephants. Something I didn't know personally is that you could be looking at 1,000 of those elephants and there could be no male adult elephants in that herd. It could be all females just walking with the babies, and that they are just kind of ruling the community and taking care of the children together. And, what happens essentially is that they breed and mate, and then the males kind of go off and live in this more kind of isolated, independent solo life.
The cowboy lifestyle.
They're kind of like these cowpokes, so to speak. And then they'll kind of meet up sometimes and find the herds and seek out a mate. And, they'll approach a female to mate with. And if the female accepts, the female has that agency, which I also think is really fascinating, she'll accept the advance essentially, and then they'll mate. And then once she gives birth, that male will go off and continue to kind of be on his own. And what's beautiful is that these herds, they all take care of each other. They all raise their children together. They look out for each other. They're wet nurses for each other. And so at times, if some of the females go off to find food, find water, they'll go off for days finding a new watering hole. And other elephants are, nursing the babies, taking care of each other. And they're just relying on each other for that care, for that, community care of raising the children together. And, they're having sex with each other. Like I was saying, that's definitely not a thing that's not happening. The men aren't around and the females are definitely still having sex.
And they were roommates.
Yeah,
and they were
exactly.
roommates. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, yes, these elephants developing these strong, intimate bonds, it's caretaking. It's true caretaking and being in life together. And it's this very, very powerful, non-nuclear, matriarchal society.
This reminds me of something that I've heard about, like we mentioned earlier, there's no need to justify any sort of same-sex behavior, same-sex coupling, but something that I have heard described as an evolutionary benefit, I suppose, of same-sex mating behavior is that there's not always going to be a one-to-one offspring to parent ratio, right? You're going to have some parents get lost, or there's, an amount of offspring that need to be cared for by the community that they're not always going to have their parent there. So if you have this strong community of couples that are together, that are functioning as a family unit, they can provide for some of those offspring that maybe have lost a parent, or, you need that foundation of other parents that are going to provide for children that they haven't biologically produced. Because otherwise you're going to have this population collapse where you have too many offspring and not enough parents to care for them.
Right. Totally.
Yeah, and you do see a lot of like pairs raising young, whether it's their own or not, especially among birds like swans, particularly black swans, penguins. But I think what's really beautiful about the elephants is that the bonding is so expansive. It's like looking at the way that it's kind of the it takes a village approach. It's saying that like family structure can be really inclusive. There are examples of there being like two raising the young, but also it's like, it's not necessarily the ones that are having sex with each other that are also doing the parenting. It may be other ones who have like more of a parenting proclivity. So the sex can happen separately from that. So just as there are opportunities and instances to say like, yes, like same-sex sexual behavior creates closer bonds that can be beneficial for child rearing or like for birds for like bringing your clutch to fledge. But that's not always the case. Sometimes they're like having sex and like they're not helping out at home. And it's a different like group or unit that's doing the child rearing. So in the podcast, we're looking about all of those overlapping instances of queerness and sort of holding them together.
There's often this like fear of scientists or academics to nobody wants to anthropomorphize, right? Nobody wants to like ascribe any sort of human emotion on animals. But then I think that like leans so far into like we can't ever expect animals to like things or like we don't want animals to like have fun and enjoy things. And so you can swing over into like over sterilizing the animals and just be like, animals just like to do things sometimes. Sometimes they just do things because it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And this happens all the time with the observations of same-sex behavior in animals. They're just like, there's got to be a reason. So they're like, the reason is purely about developing dominance. Like, this is very true for giraffes. If we want to move on to another hooved animal, like herd animal out on the plains, giraffes have a very high frequency of same-sex sexual behavior among the males. And so frequently it is discounted, misclassified, or ignored because it's easier to interpret this behavior as being purely about dominance and aggression. Because we have these like untrue, unfounded notions that there are gendered behaviors, that there are two genders and that there's gendered behaviors, and if it's a male then it has to be dominant, and so if it's two males it has to be about fighting. And so even if there's clear signs of like actual sex happening, they like are so hesitant to call it that, and they'll just categorize the data as being purely a social function.
Which reminds me so much of how like historians talk about gay relationships in history, where they just cannot.
Like you go back to like the Greco-Roman, they're like, all of these men, like all of the documents say that this man had a love who was another man, and they're like, they must have meant it in a battle sort of way.
Just bros.
And you're like,
throwing around.
Just bros. You're like, fellas, is it gay to just like have copious amounts of sex with your other male giraffes? And what's interesting about giraffes for me, they're one of my favorite examples, is that they do have a hierarchy among the males in the herds. That does exist, but when it comes to having sex, all that goes out the window. The sex is happening despite rank, despite status. It's about who is curious, who is engaged, who's around. There was a study in Tanzania not that long ago that observed giraffes in the wild for 3,200 hours. 18 copulations, full copulations were observed. Of those, 17 of them were male-male. So
let's go. Putting up numbers.
Yeah, I know. Here we go. Giraffes are doing it. And part of that, the female giraffes are actually having sex with themselves and each other as well, but because it's lower frequency and the male giraffes are just doing it so gregariously, swinging their big old necks around that like often researchers will just like not even include female sex. They're just like, we have literally no idea why. that would happen. And it's happening infrequently in the case of giraffes. And so we'll just like completely ignore that, which is a reflection of misogyny as well. But the male giraffes, there's like homo communism going on. They're just like, we're spending a lot of time together and we do have the social order.
It's the great equalizer.
And then we can like live a great, dream life, a dream utopia.
I think that's like getting into also the aversion of humans to like grapple with animals not being in these sort of like monogamous paired relationships, right? It's like, oh, well, I mean, you're just in a big group. And if you don't already have this expectation that you're going to be partnered with a specific like couple, I mean, if you don't have that structure already, then why bother?
Right. That's like a evergreen thing that is getting like projected onto animals that like why they should be monogamous. Like, and anytime there's actually, of all of the species in the world, only, 3 to 5% of them practice any monogamy at all. And for the most part, that monogamy is only seasonal. It's like only during the breeding season, like with penguins. Or it might be monogamy that's practiced between queer partnerships, like with dolphins. Often what you see is the only monogamous relationships are among like two males. And I say monogamous, but it's also an open relationship. So I'm like, even then, there's like terms to that, but they will stay together for like 30, 40 years. Like two dolphins will be pair bonded, but that's something that's often being projected. Anne Stagg, who is a Canadian biologist, the first to observe and publish about queer giraffes. One thing that I find really exciting about her first publication, which came out in the 1950s, was that she said there doesn't seem to be any jealousy among partners. Which is so beautiful, but also you're like, why would there be? That feels like such a distinctly human thing. Right? And so you're like, the kind of like the shock and the awe and also the joy of there not being jealousy is there. But like, that's such a human framework. Yeah. Because like, they're not like, why are you doing that? You've betrayed me. It's not malice. They're oriented differently.
Yeah, and because the only other animals I could think of that have this sort of like jealousy towards mating competitors, right, would be like a lion or like a leopard or something who might like chase away a competitor, or might like kill the offspring of their competitor, or something like that. But they also have multiple partners, right? Like a male lion will have multiple female partners that he will mate with. And I mean, I'm certain some of those female lions are maybe making their own fun together within their little pride.
There certainly.
I mean, it's called a pride.
Y'all. Happy pride, y'all. Yes. Yeah, Lions are displaying a lot of same-sex sexual behavior as well as courtship and affection.
I'm trying to go back to find, I remember reading this story that I was so charmed by, of a bald eagle throuple.
Oh, I know that story.
Yeah, it was a trio of bald eagles, 2 males and 1 female, living and raising chicks together at the Upper Mississippi River National Wildlife Refuge in Illinois.
I'm looking it up too, because this is not a story that I'm familiar with, but I do love that it's referred to as an eagle trio in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website.
Okay, yes. U.S. Fish and Wildlife.
And of course that they're highlighting their parenting success, but it's just amazing that if you look at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, it's Eagle Trio sees parenting success in Illinois, which is really quite a way to frame a throuple.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was told the story by a wonderful ornithologist and evolutionary biologist who was conscientious about not wanting to anthropomorphize. So when I was like, well, so what's going on between these two fellas? She was like, there is something going on, but we can't say what it is. And I don't feel comfortable calling it queer. And I don't feel comfortable calling this a polyamorous relationship. And yet she was also like willing to sort of jokingly talk about like, before the male joined the nest, he was a deadbeat dad.
Oh.
She wanted a divorce. Like, And so it sort of like betrays the way that we as humans cannot step outside of our experience, the ways that our brains function and make meaning and make narrative of what we're seeing. And we project our experiences onto there. And so she was at first very much like identifying with this female eagle who was just like, why will you not support me in raising this clutch of eggs? But then she felt really hesitant to enter into territory that was unfamiliar with her when it came to there being like 2 male eagles in there. Because even after the female passed, the 2 males stayed together. So like that is queer.
And they continued raising the chicks?
They did, yeah. And eventually another female came, but the 2 all, like stayed together and they continued raising the chicks.
I like that. I wonder if there was something about like being with another male partner that kicked something in his brain of being like, oh, wait, this is how you're supposed to parent. Like, I don't know, maybe like having an example around was like, oh, like maybe just needed that to kickstart the old instinct.
Yeah, and maybe it's just like, there is a benefit to having like more creatures involved, right? Like you can then go off and look for food while like there's always gonna be like more than one staying there. And so who knows, maybe he was just like very unhappy. Maybe his like long lost like male eagle lover had just like flown into town and he was just like torn up about it.
Oh, when your ex comes back into town. Ugh.
And you're just like, I still have feelings for you. And they made do. They made it happen.
Oh, and I love that. First of all, I love that it's bald eagles.
I do too.
Right, because like you immediately have to like identify them as like this iconic symbol of America, right? Because that's our like national bird, right? So it's a very symbolic bird, I think, to a lot of Americans.
Yes.
But also that so much of this happened on a live stream.
I know.
Yes, I love it. I love it.
Which is great because that just like removes the sort of like editorializing that people can do about it, right? Because it's just like, well, it's there on camera and it's for the whole world to see and there's no editing.
Everyone can just see it. Yeah.
It's just happening live. And I love live cams. I love any sort of like Nest Cam or...
Give me a Nest Cam.
Oh my gosh.
For sure.
But like you were mentioning earlier, like it's so easy for people to write off behaviors as, oh, well, that's because they were in captivity, or that's because maybe their range is compromised. Like, oh, they're doing this because of some other reason that we can kind of like use to write it off as like not natural behavior. And then here they are in a wildlife refuge on a live cam. Like, nope, hey, we're doing it anyway.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. And that's not to like discount or discredit that there are environmental impacts.
For sure.
Like those are real. We are changing the planet. But like, yeah, that's not the reason why same-sex sexual behavior and partnership is happening. Even among like whooping cranes, like a very beautiful and tragically endangered species. Recently, there have been same-sex pair bonding and clutch raising happening among these whooping cranes successfully. And you're like, oh, so it's not about there being like a population burst. It's not about like they're like on the brink of extinction and still finding alternative ways to parent and be together. And that's beautiful. And to me, that speaks to just there's something just like innate, maybe not in like a species, but in those birds. You know, those birds did that.
Right. Yeah. Nobody asked them to.
They weren't looking around and being like, oh, dang, there's not very much of us. Can't be gay today.
But also, like, they weren't necessarily, like, influenced by others around them. This wasn't, like, a learned behavior. It was just...
And it wasn't learned. No, and they weren't just like, oh, whoopsie, I accidentally
pair bonded.
Right.
Yeah. Which is another thing. They're often like, if a male is, you know, exploring another, like a female giraffe, it's just very easily explained like, oh, the purpose is sex. Mm-hmm. But then when it comes to like any sort of same-sex exploration, it's just like, it must be a mistake. Maybe it's befuddlement. Maybe
they were confused.
They were confused.
Yeah, because animals totally don't have any way to tell. Like,
they have such intricate ways of telling that we don't know how to tell. We look at monomorphic creatures and we're like, I have no idea what pigeon is what. But they have ways of telling, and they're sophisticated. They have skills of perception that are beyond what we have, that we don't know, we can't access. And so they're following some other impulse, which I believe much of that is joy, much of that is pleasure.
One of my favorite sort of like silly little stories that we came across in like an early episode of this podcast was about when horseshoe crabs are ready to do their mating, they all sort of come up onto the beach, and there's this big, it's an event along like the Atlantic coast. You'll have the horseshoe crabs coming up, and they are going bananas. And the funny thing about horseshoe crabs, they don't have great sensory perception. Like, they're not really great at like seeing the world around them. So a lot of times you'll have horseshoe crabs that end up just mating with like vaguely horseshoe crab shaped sort of objects. So there are pictures of them like mounting a frisbee,
like sandals that were just like abandoned.
They're like, is this anything? I don't know. But like, they have very sort of limited perception of the world around them. And animals have their own ways of telling each other apart and knowing what they're dealing with. Like they know what they're doing.
Yes.
Yeah, especially with these herd animals, these like with complex social structures.
Yeah. I feel like all of this sort of makes me feel a little bit more at home, in the animal kingdom. And it's very comforting to be reminded of like our place in nature, not separate from it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And one of my takeaways from this conversation is also just how important it is to go and look at nature, to be in nature, to like give yourself that opportunity and not just solely rely on like what you're being told, but like we need more people out looking, exploring, and expanding our understanding and like speaking to what they experience. And that's so important. So just like fostering that curiosity among everyone, like whether it's just going and looking at the pigeons outside the, corner store, or going to the zoo, or going to your park, or like going on a whale tour, like go look at animals, see what you see, feel what you feel.
Yeah, and maintaining that place of curiosity of like not knowing what is happening, because like we don't, and being comfortable in that place of wonder, like truly like I wonder what they're doing, because like we're talking about, they know and we often don't, and a lot of times what we've been told just isn't the full story. And some of what we're doing in the show is telling more of the full story, and some of what we're doing in the show is remaining in the space of not knowing.
Oh yeah, because that's where the fun part of science is in like having mysteries, right? Like always leaving room for learning more.
Yes.
And something we talk about on the show a lot too is like the value of diversity in thought, because like if the only people doing this research and the only people that get to be like you said earlier, like the arbiters of science, right? If they're all from the same background and they all are coming from the same sort of perspective, you're going to get these narrow-minded sort of like tunnel vision. Like a lot of stuff is going to get lost. Whereas if you have researchers and scientists and observers and naturalists coming in from like a wide diversity of backgrounds and perspectives, you're going to get people either noticing or just not being afraid to say what they see, right?
Yes.
Like you're going to get a much more robust and well-grounded, I think, picture of the world, right? When you're not just seeing it through narrow lenses.
Yes, and it's a sad symptom of being told that nature only exists in one way, that then only a certain type of person who like identifies that way feels like nature is for them. And that's just not the case. Like we are nature, we are part of nature. Our queerness is rooted in nature. And so like, yes, the more that queer people are out in nature and also, I mean, whether or not you're entering into the sciences or if you're just entering into the park, like do it, go explore, be curious. And that's really important.
And for anybody listening who wants to go forth and be gay in nature and learn more about queerness in nature, could you let people listening know where they can find more about your podcast?
Yes. So you can find A Field Guide to Gay Animals out wherever you get your podcasts on June 13th. That is when it premieres. The first episode launches June 13th, A Field Guide to Gay Animals. It is a 5-episode series, and it's coming out weekly. So wherever you get those podcasts, whatever app you have on your phone, it's going to be there. And we're really excited for you to listen to it. And we're also on Instagram at A Field Guide to Gay Animals.
Yeah, and let us know where you listen. If you take the show out into nature, we want to know about it.
Oh my gosh, I love that. When people let me know that, like, they're like, oh, I listened to this podcast while I was, like, driving past the Grand Canyon. Because I feel like it's like, well, I kind of got to go on that trip then. Like, Also, I would like to know if there's anywhere our friends listening can go to see more from you two personally. Like if you have social medias, websites, anywhere you want people to go to see more of your work. Let's start with Owen.
Yeah, I have a website, owenever.com. I'll be working on a play in New York in the month of June. If you're around there, I'll be putting up information about that. And other than that, I'm in New Orleans. I'm around, so come find me.
Awesome. How about you, Laine?
I don't have a website, but you can find other work that I've done in the podcast world if you just use good old Google. So if you just Google my name, Laine Kaplan-Levenson, you can find a bunch of stuff that I've done before this, and I hope you like it.
Perfect. And I'll have links to everything in the episode description. Actually, this episode is going up the day that Field Guide to Gay Animals will be going live. So anybody listening can just scroll through in the description and click through to see either Field Guide to Gay Animals or more work from Laine and Owen. Laine and Owen, this has been an incredible time. I am so thankful for your time and your enthusiasm and passion and knowledge and queerness. So thank you so much for joining us. We will talk to you all later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Have fun out there in the animal queendom.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you feel a little more closely held by nature. If you liked what you heard, I hope you leave behind some kind words for us in a review on your podcast app of choice. If you want to hang out with us online, we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Discord. Links to everything will be in the episode description. You can also send me an email at ellen@justthezooofus.com if you have a cool animal you'd like to hear us talk about on the show. We would like to thank Maximum Fun for having us on their network alongside their other wonderful shows like the ones that you heard promos for here today. You can go check those out and learn more about the network, how you can be a part of supporting our show, and get access to our exclusive bonus content over at MaximumFun.org. Finally, we would like to thank Louis Zong for our theme music. That's all for today. We'll see you next week. Thanks. Bye.
Maximum Fun.
A worker-owned network
of artist-owned shows.
supported
Directly
by you.